You're listening to the BBT. I'm John Krol, speaking with Keith Girouard from the Mass Small Business Development Center Network. And the topic is, how much money do you need to start your business? And I'm sure the answer is varied depending on the business. But Keith, that's a question that you get quite a bit.
Well, yes, anyone who is looking to start a business or even to finance a business, this is a very important question. And you're right, John, it does depend on the situation and it can vary. But there are some very universal things that people will need to look at. Almost everybody understands that if you're going to start a business, you're going to have startup capital. You're going to need startup money. And that's one-time only, what we call one-time only capital expenditures. And let me give you some of the categories of which startup, in the area of startup, that you would need money for. For equipment and furnishings, some, whether it's like computers or specialized equipment or furnishings, chairs, tables, desks, display racks, other types of racks, you're going to need money for equipment and furnishings. Second is leasehold improvements, and that means the inside work or outside work that you need to do your space. Maybe it's signage that you need. So leasehold improvements, and that sometimes can be a fairly large number if you're doing major renovations. Supplies and inventory. Almost every business needs some supplies and some inventory, some cases more inventory. Retail operation, for example, needs to fill those racks, needs to fill that floor. Sometimes they'll get terms or conditions that they'll be able to get from their suppliers, but oftentimes they're going to need to borrow money in order to be able to do that. Advertising and marketing. This is not ongoing advertising and marketing. This is for a marketing push or a boost. And that means as you're opening or before you're opening, whether you want to do a grand opening kinds of thing, if you're a retail store or if you're a restaurant, or maybe it's just to create a buzz and excitement, let people know that you're there. Registrations, licenses, and permits. Those things you have to, if you're going to do work, you're probably going to have to pull building permits. You might have to do some registrations and licensing. Deposits. People often overlook deposits. Now they can say, oh yeah, I'm going to need to have deposits for my rent, first, last month. But insurance often requires deposits. Utilities, if you have a space, you're an unknown to them, they're going to require deposits. There may be other types of deposits that you need. And then lastly, professional services. Accountant, attorney, a graphic artist, a marketing specialist, any one of those things under professional services to help you get launched. So that would be just sort of a category of areas that you would need on the startup.
And a lot of those, again, when you look at the capital up front, especially if you have a location where you actually have to fill it with inventory and that sort of thing, is one factor. But of course, a lot of businesses today are much more flexible. And you mentioned, if you're a marketing business, as an example, like my business, is not so heavy on that sort of upfront capital for stuff, as it were. Right. It's more the sort of intellectual capital that you have and so forth. But sometimes people don't realize how much investment you still need up front, even when you don't have that large retail space or some location.
Yeah, it can kind of sneak up on you, and that's why it's really helpful to go through a systematic process where you're looking at your startup and what your startup needs are. And then, of course, there's the second category, which is working capital. And this is something that people just almost randomly guess about. And what I would encourage them is to really go through a systematic process where you're looking at that. And there are some sort of specialized kinds of sort of working capital kinds of things, and then there's a universal one. The specialized one is for some research and development. You see that with software development or technology sort of oriented kind of companies. They'll need to do some research and development to get their product or their service fine-tuned for that. Design and construction, we'll see that in the hospitality areas, that they'll need to look at costs that are associated with that. Intellectual property and prototype development, when we're working with inventors and entrepreneurs, kinds of, there's some costs that are associated, whether it's securing a trademark or a patent, or whether it's a prototype development of an invention that you have. But the last one is something that's universal, and that's negative cash flow. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to, because it can sneak up on you pretty quickly. The logic is pretty pervasive, and that is that when you start a business, your expenses, your ongoing expenses, are going to be up on the expense column somewhere, right? but your income is low and you're building it. So there's going to be a period of time that you're not going to, it's going to take you to reach your break-even point. And that cumulative amount of money is going to be able to help, that cumulative amount of money is going to be needed for you to be able to meet what we call negative cash flow months. So you need to have a pot of money over there. We call that working capital. So between the working capital and the startup money, that's generally the startup funds that you need. That's generally gives you a good idea of how much money you need to start your business.
So looking at that, there are individuals who would have to go out for a loan. I mean, if you're lucky, you may
Right.
be independently wealthy and have plenty of money saved up, but that's not most entrepreneurs, I don't think. And so in that case, you really need to work with professionals on this and really work through a business plan. That's something that I know that you do with the Mass Small Business Development Center Network and working with your partners in the financial sector. Because in order for it to work, everyone's got to be confident before that money goes into it that it is going to work.
Certainly, if you're seeking financing, you're going to need to go through that. But I would argue that the first person that you need to convince that this is a good idea is you.
That's right.
Is the person who's launching this business, and to go through a process, and it might be a little bit painful or a little bit extended process. It's really in your best interest because you really want to understand how is this business going to operate and how is it going to perform financially, and you won't know that until how much money you need to start it. So it's very important. So I would agree with you. It's often a good step to seek the advice and counsel of a professional when you're doing this.
And one of those is Keith Girouard, who we're talking with today on the BBT. We'll continue our conversation with Keith after